So our last discussant is, sorry, Ivan Sablin. He heads the research group titled Entangled Parliamentarisms, Constitutional Practices in Russia, Ukraine, China, and Mongolia from 1905 to 2005 at Heidelberg University, and it's sponsored by the European Research Council. So his research interests include the history of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union with special attention to Siberia and the Russian Far East and global intellectual history. Ivan Sablin also recently co-edited a volume titled Planting Parliaments in Eurasia, 1850 to 1950, Concepts, Practices, and Mythologies. So Ivan, maybe if you could just join us and also the other presenters so you can make the final discussion. Yeah. The other two presenters can also join us. So Jakub also can join us, of course. So you can respond to Ivan.
I'll take mine.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also many thanks to all of the organizers for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to read and listen to and comment on three wonderful presentations, from which I really learned a lot and which gave me a lot of food for thought. So it was quite interesting to see how they work together, the three presentations. And I think one concept that I picked up from Theresia's paper, the concept of consultative dictatorship, is quite interesting in this regard. But of course, also the concept of self-management and elements of self-management is very important as well, not just as an ideological concept developed in Yugoslavia, but as we saw in Jakub's paper, as a very practical instrument. So in that regard, comparing the three state socialist regimes and these elements that kind of water down the idea of one-party dictatorship and make the picture more complex allows us to classify them in three categories, I would say. And the party is there in most cases. It's still there, right? For example, in the case of the GDR in Theresia's paper, we have a multi-party system which is designed from above for merely pragmatic purposes. And we have a situation which is unique in the world of state socialism, because new parties are actually being created. So in those situations where there was also formally or nominally multi-party parliamentarism, we usually have either, nominal successors of previously existing parties or kind of those parties which emerged during the revolution. This is probably the case of the People's Republic of China, where you have 8 parties still. But here in the GDR, we have a very unique situation. And I will come back with my questions after that. So that's kind of the first model, designed from above for pragmatic purposes in the political sphere and in the sphere of external propaganda. Then we have the case of Yugoslavia and self-management presented by Anna. It was again designed from above, but I would say that here the important task was to prove a theoretical point on the side of Kardel, right? To prove true succession to Marx and, mainly to Western European communists, and to show that in the big argument, which at first involved Soviet and then Yugoslav communists, but later was joined by Chinese communists, Yugoslavs had a really strong theoretical model of building a socialist society. And as such, the model of Yugoslav self-management and the socio-political organizations as part of that model had tremendous consequences in the state socialist world. For example, there was great interest in that in the Soviet dissident circles. And the whole idea of self-management and the increasing role of associations which are similar to the ones that Anna discussed played a huge role in the perestroika, because the perestroika Soviet parliament included elements of the Yugoslav tricameral legislature, but in one chamber, so to say, with nomination from organizations. So it had tremendous effect in the global history of socialism. And in Jakub's paper, we have also an institution which is designed from above, but by the democratically minded, or let's say more democratically minded or more progressive minded elements in the Communist Party. And the idea is not kind of a big theoretical master plan of designing a third way. It's actually very practical and pragmatic idea of trying to alleviate economic hardships and trying to, well, genuinely find the capacity for action, for resolution of problems among the workers themselves. And of course, it is also connected into the global history of state socialism, because it was inspired by the Yugoslav example, at least kind of the theoretical part. And then again, it was a great inspiration for Soviet dissidents and perestroika. I would say that the Prague Spring and the developments of trying to build socialism with a human face was the most, if we kind of discuss single event, that was the most important single event for the Soviet dissident movement after that. So I have also some specific comments and questions for each of the three presenters. As said, I learned a lot, and I found all three presentations very rich and very well-grounded in the sources. So in Theresia's presentation, I especially liked the interplay between foreign policy and domestic policy goals of creating a multi-party system. Because, for example, it was quite astonishing to see that National Democratic Party included the former NSDAP members. So actually I wanted to ask a little bit more about that. I know that's not the party that you focused on specifically, but how was it, let's say, explained to the general populace in propaganda and so on? And kind of connected to that, how did the party education function in the smaller parties? So was it part of the bigger SED-led education programs, or was it something specific? So, for example, was there like peasant party school, or conferences and so on? And I was wondering also about the initial period. Was elite recruitment important at all? So could these other parties, especially the newly created parties, the peasant party, well, I guess only the peasant party, so could it become a springboard for making a career in the government? And could it become a preparatory kind of stage to then move to SED leadership? Then concerning Jakub's paper, again, I was very interested to see kind of what's the content of Prague Spring was and why the Soviet side found it so dangerous. So my question relates to the practices of these works councils. So did the candidates have programs when they ran, or were they evaluated solely on their competence? So did they propose that they want to change something in the specific factory or not? And then was it the first instance when scientific technical intelligentsia kind of became a new and powerful group in the Czechoslovak society, like being legitimized through the elections? Again, here a parallel with the Soviet experience. Mark Lipovetsky studied scientific technical intelligentsia and their leadership in the perestroika. So, and then finally, how and why was the movement suppressed? I mean, we could see some hints, right? in the bigger conference where also criticism of the party was discussed. But if you had a look at the internal documents of the new conservative party leadership, so what specifically was dangerous about the whole movement? Then coming to Anna's papers, Anna's paper, I was again very intrigued by the somewhat interesting typology of the 5 socio-political organizations, or to put it in a different way, kind of the whole theory behind it. Because you at one point, Cardell, of course, Cardell at one point downgrades the role of the Communist Party to being one of the 5, but at the same time elevates organizations which are not necessarily mutually exclusive. For example, the Socialist Alliance of the Working People and the trade unions are kind of located in the same economic occupational sphere. So the marker of difference there is occupation. So with youth, it's clear, it's age. With the veterans, it's of course also age, in the sense that it's one liberation war, right? So we have kind of this mixed criteria. So I was wondering how was that explained from the theoretical standpoint, and to what extent, after the creation of this 5 organization system, the other 4 were independent from the League of Communists, and how strong was their position. So could, for example, the leadership of these organizations challenge, at least at Republican or maybe local level, the communists? So could they say that, could they come up with any kind of theoretical argument? So this mainly comes to your point about the mediation between society and the state. And then did they produce any strains of oppositional thought? So did any dissidents come from that background? I mean, the most famous dissident, Gilos, of course, came from the party leadership itself, but I was wondering about the veterans especially. Yeah, I think that would be all from my side, so that we have sufficient time for the discussion.
So I start. I apologize for.
Sorry. I think that you can. Yeah, of course, answer.
I apologize for my English. Perhaps I need to switch in German. The NDPD is the bloc party we know less. There is no book, no dissertation which is founded on the files until the 19th. That is the case for the other bloc parties for the period about 1960, 1970s. There is we do not know a lot to these parties. For the NDPD, you have in mind that in 1947, the SED officially stopped the denazification. In the SBZ, the denazification was stopped prior to the Western zones. And normally the explanation is the party should solve this problem as well, because the former NSDAP members, and there were a lot, yes, and the Wehrmacht, the soldiers, need a political homeland. And they should not, and they are not allowed to go to the SED, and they should not go to the CDU and LDP. And so this NDPD was an option. And you have in the Peasants' Party and in the National Democratic Party that the Soviets are searching for prisoners of war who are educated in the Antifa lagers during the Second World War, and this personal structure is in this party until the end. You saw Hohmann; he is prison of Poe, as prisoners of war, and that's the point the NDPD started. It is you have elites like Vinzenz Müller for the NVA. Here is the connection, also the NDPD membership. And in the 70s and 80s, it's interesting that the NDPD was the party gradually for intellectuals, for writers, and with a special purpose to write the so-called Wandlungsliteratur, as how the individuals elevate or change their mind. And the other question concerning the party education, the bloc parties should establish their own educational program. And in the beginning, they need the help from the SED. And we know for the Peasants' Party that in the 70s and 80s, sometimes the functionaries visit the SED schools. And perhaps I mentioned that for the Christian Democratic Union, that's in this part we have literature, especially on this point. It was a great aim, yes. For example, to explain the members why they should follow concept like the Christian realism. The CDU split of the churches, yes, the churches and Christians from 1951 on do not want to have contact with the CDU. Why? Because the concept is different to the churches, and so you have to build up a educational program to explain these strange things like Christian socialism and why the CDU helped the SED to oppress and arrest the Christian youth groups in 1953, and why the CDU helped the SED to durchführen die Jugendweihe. You call this secular ritus. And the CDU helped the SED to do this. The question concerning the recruiting of elites, the elite recruitment, all the party try to do this for governmental positions, but the aim was not that these personnel should go to the SED, and that was not accepted. That was not accepted, yes. Sometimes this happens, but you have lots of discussions if this may be or not, and I wrote in the longer version the example of one professor, the director of the Deutsche Landwirtschaftsakademie, who was member of the DPD but sat in the Volkskammer for the Kulturbund, not for the party but the Kulturbund, one of these mass organizations. And he was, it's interesting that he focuses in the 60s for the Naturschutzbewegung.
Environmental.
At the time when this was not familiar to the SED policy. and in the middle of the 70s, this was cut off by the new minister. So there, it was a chance for elites to be in the system and to make career. If they do not want to go into the SED, they choose one of these other bloc parties. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Me? On topic of ties between the Prague Spring and Perestroika, there was also the personal ties, because the leading ideological brain of democratic socialism in Czechoslovakia, Zdeněk Mlynář, was the personal friend of Gorbachev. So there was a personal tie. Why Russia intervened? The main reason the end of the Prague Spring was that Czechoslovakia was the only state on the border that wasn't occupied by the Soviet army, and that was the not strong position. So some theories are influential theories are speaking about this reason. It was the main reason it was necessary to strengthen the position in Czechoslovakia, which was strengthened in other countries before. And Czechoslovak army, nota bene in situation of reform communism, wasn't able to defend the socialist bloc. And the technical intelligentsia, I think in the 1950s there was the heroes of socialism, strong working class making by the hands, and it completely changed in the times of scientific and technical revolutions in the 1960s, because there stood up new generation of technical intelligentsia educated on the socialist schools, universities during their work at nights and weekends, and it were the people who legitimated themselves by the labor roots, because they worked in factories and studied during the work, and in 1960s this educated working class had the main position in enterprises, and they used that was a generational act, because they used Prague Spring to stood up on the positions of the former labor leaders, which took the leading place in 1948, past the Second World War and February coup in Czechoslovakia, but they didn't have the education and wasn't able to understand the economic reform. So that was a very generational phenomenon, I think. And on the factory levels, and the technical intelligentsia was the main force of Prague Spring. It's without any discussion. And the next regime, which started in 1969, was able to adapt it, the part of this technical intelligentsia, not in the reform way, but they used these people also. So at the factory level, the technical intelligentsia will be the most influential power also in 1989. And why the works councils were a problem for the regime in 1969? That was the main argument wasn't the democracy or autocracy, or that was not a theoretical one argumentation. The main argument was that the reform isn't successful in economical way, because I have said it, in 1968 the wages of workers grown very rapidly, 6% per year. That was something in mid 60s unbelievable and unimaginable. And in 1968, in 1 year, there was so big start of growth of wages, and but the productivity wasn't growing so fast. And so the official main reason was that the reform wasn't successful. But the leaders of the movement of works councils argumented right way that it is only the start of the reform, and they are operating in the central bureaucratic system. So their ability to make enterprises autonomic, make decision making wasn't work, and they argued good way that it needs some time to the reform to start working, but the politically used self-government wasn't something useful in the times of Soviet occupation, and they needed to be liquidated.
Thank you for your questions, Ivan. So I will try to answer, but these are going to be just my first reflection on these questions. So the idea behind, or how it made sense that like trade unions and Socialist Alliance and other organizations could somehow work in or were part of the same structure. So on the level of municipality, or according to the communal system, the municipality should be a small state, or a state within a municipality. So that the idea was that the industry and the municipality, so the municipal structures, that they work together as a unit. So in this sense, I think it could it made sense then that the unions in the factories and also other organizations that would be more active within the other municipal structures could work together. So just my first thoughts. Then about the I'm especially interested in this mediation level, not so much on the dissent. So maybe on the Republican or the federal level, maybe my colleagues that works on youth organization can say more. But I was interested. I did a research about the different voluntary associations, like student association or voluntary firefighting associations, who were a part of the Socialist Alliance. And for example, when at the end of the 80s, in 1990, when the Socialist Alliance was preparing itself for the new elections, they also advocated in the so I know very well the case of the firefighting organizations. So they would advocate it, please vote for our party. And the for our party, and the firefighters also knew that they have some this is the moment where they can extract something for their own organization. And for oppositional thought, for my diploma work, so it's quite a long time ago, I was working on I was researching the student association also on the municipal level, and they would have constant, so the student organization, they would have constant discussions and negotiations with the authorities at the municipalities. But I would have to check again for specific examples. But it's maybe in short. Maybe.
Yeah, I should add.
Yeah, I wanted to say that probably. Thank you for this conversation, but probably somebody from the audience also
maybe
has
I should add just briefly that, of course, a socio-political organization, but also it was a network organization. They were connected together, but they had certain features, especially Socialist Organization, the Alliance of Youth. As after Tito's death, Slovenia, especially since 1982, it became more and more independent. They saw themselves as an umbrella also for another descent of other social movements, civil society movement, gay lesbian movement, environmental movement, the new spirituality movement, especially after 86. So what they happened, they became more and more critical towards the system, and the critical post-Marxists, the Marxists became post-Marxist, and they even became in a way liberals. But when they discovered state as a way of dissent, because the state was not really popular in Kardel's theory. And they discovered liberal state as a guardian of civil rights. And they demanded let's say this legal state and everything, and they had powerful tool at their disposal, because the leaders of communists would actually let them do it, because usually they were children of those. They had important tool. It was the Mladina weekly. It started as actually very dull weekly of the socialist organization. It became alternative media, and at the end of the 80s, the most popular media in Slovenia, because they openly attacked those, and they were financed by the system, but they attacked the system at the same time. It was a very funny situation. There were no samizdat in Slovenia, Yugoslavia, and this party, maybe to conclude this long story short, this slowly evolved to the Liberal Democratic Party, and it took these ideas of these guardians of new social movements, from rock and roll to gay, lesbian, liberal in this sense, in cultural sense, actually, more than in entrepreneurial sense, but also, of course. And they took it as an ideology. So we had this tradition since like 8-10 years. It was 1989. Let's just make a party out of it, liberal party, but liberal in this sense, because when they discovered, especially Slavoj Žižek, who became associated with it, that on the one hand, there was old communists in 1990, and on the other hand, there was right-wingers and nationalists. So let's have our own third way. We are liberal, but liberal in a good sense. So I hope I was clear. So yes, dissent was there, and dissent was also more in youth organization, less in big mastodon called Socialist Alliance, which transformed itself as a socialist party, and lately just merged into the Social Democratic Party. Okay, that's the Liberal Democratic Party.
At the end, the bigger, the smaller party, the youth organization, actually swallowed the large one.
Yes, that was it.
Maybe I should add when we're talking about socialist alliance of the working people, we must see two phases of its. When it was born in 1953, it was meant to show the Westerns that the Communist Party is not the only party in Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. But when Karel was in Norway and in Sweden, and Norway's Socialist Party said to him, when you will have the same people as the leaders of the two parties, then for us this is one party system, and you know you cannot join the Socialist International. So, and the second phase is after the 1974 Constitution, when Socialist Alliance of Working People was an organization which includes all the others. The Communist Party was also the part of it. It was obligatory obligatory members for everything, for the scout organization, for the firemen, for everyone. So also for the youth organization, and the second one where this dissent worked was a writers organization. Because the first open debate between Slovene cultural opposition and party members was organized by the writers organization, and it was published. So Slovenia was in the eyes of the other in Yugoslavia, from the other republics. Dusan Bilanjic, the famous Croatian historian, wrote, I think, in '86, that Slovenia is the only republic in Yugoslavia in the communist world where, when in the open tribunes, communist leaders and the dissidents are quarreling openly. And from the one of such a tribune, open tribune, came, it was addressed as the how will we write a new Slovene constitution? And then it was published. New Slovene constitution, or Gradivo.
Gradivo za slovensko
ustavo. Yeah, it was in 1987, before the crash of the Berlin Wall, and something like that. But I would ask our German colleague, for example, in those, as I say, in the Yugoslav constitutional system, it was obligatory for all those organizations to be a member of the Social Alliance. It was the same for those parties in GDR to be a member of the ESD, or if they should. Do you found any ideas, for example, that in some elections, some of them thought about what if we go to election without CLD power?
I don't know if I have.
Did some of these parties, before some of the elections in 50s, 60s, 70s, thought should we have our own candidate list for the elections?
No. That finished. We have the discussions 1947
and it was
for the third Volkskongresswahl, who was the election that prepares the Provisorische Volkskammer, and then the CDU and LDP are captured, like I explained, for the founding of the GDR, and the promise was, when the GDR is founded, we will make a free election next year, and next year there was another reason, and it ended, yes. And you have this discussion until 1947. You have discussions about parliamentary system in the Länder who existed until 1952. Then you have the Bezirke and another organization. And there are, meanwhile, dissertations about the Landtage in Sachsen and Thüringen. It's very boring to read all these things, because das Ergebnis, it's always the same. Yes, that's it's. No, there are interesting. It's interesting. In the late 80s, Gorbachev. I read that the bloc parties are instructed from the SED that the bloc parties should adopt elections and different candidates like Gorbachev recommended. And the last party who did this was the Peasant Party. They didn't manage it, but I found one file where the Peasant Party discusses. We have now one position for the party Vorstand, Parteivorstand, and first in our history we will announce 3 candidates for this one, but therefore it's sometimes it's boring to read all these protocols, and if there is one dissent, the protocol is put in the stuff, and I told to work with the MFS files is important because only in these files you have the discussions, and then you can search in other files what is the historical context of the points. If one is EM or not, that's forget it. That's not the main thing.
Thank you. I think we have another comment online or a question. Karin, could you
we have
please
a
read it?
question. Yes, we have a question via Zoom chat from Jana Javornik, and it's for Anna. And it goes only slight off topic. One of the groups I missed being mentioned in Anna's talk was the Alliance of Women's Associations, since 1961, the Conference for the Social Activity of Women, which was officially recognized by the Communist Party. The alliance was supposedly important because of its systematic promotion of equal opportunities and gender equality, challenging gender division of labor. I would greatly appreciate it if Anna could offer any further insights into their role within the development of labor rights and industrial relations, including childcare services in Yugoslavia, Slovenia, and whether they were active as suggested in limited comparative European social policy literature. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I have to say that I need to disappoint Jana. As I said at the beginning, I'm not really, in my research, I don't really focus on the socio-political organizations. I prepared this presentation today for our event because in my research, I do come across especially of the Socialist Alliance and the veteran organization, but unfortunately not the women's organization. And maybe if someone in the
obviously you discussed those five.
Yeah.
Organization, and this women's organization doesn't have the status of it. Of course, it was part of Socialist Alliance. Everything was part of Socialist Alliance.
But maybe we have here.
Alice is now gone.
No, Ivana.
Yeah. I can say something more, and I will say actually much more on Monday when I have my presentation. But basically, when the People's Front gets transformed into the Alliance of the Working People, the Anti-Fascist Women's Front also gets administratively transformed. This is often interpreted as the solution of the Anti-Fascist Women's Front, but it's not actually necessarily the case. It's simply that the Anti-Fascist Women's Front changes its name and becomes decentralized and a part of the Socialist Alliance of the Working of the working people. And it's basically one of the associations, and this is how it continues to work until the 1990s. In 1961, they changed their name, and actually we have a kind of slower, let's say, integration of the association into the Socialist Alliance of the Working People, but otherwise it was rather, it had like a special status, and it was like a rather sort of complete organization by itself, with a federal level, republic level, municipal level, and a delegate system sort of within itself. This is how it works in 61. So it's rather like a name change. And then in 74, with the new constitution, it gets sort of even more integrated. And also the Socialist Alliance of the Working People itself, they have a commission for women, but often the members actually of the Women's Association and this women's commissions, I mean, are the same. This is like they are part of these different kinds of councils. And what you mentioned about household work and care work, so this is something that so the problem of the double burden is something that the organizations really focus on. It's their main agenda, especially in the 1950s and early 1960s. And this is something I will talk about on Monday. They developed like a really broad range of initiatives and collaborations with other associations in the attempt to resolve the issue of household work. And household work here is seen both as housework, but also as care work, so care for children and elderly people. And for example, I think here maybe this is also something that could answer the question, what's the difference between having trade union associations and allies for working people, is that actually, although women's organizations were also focused on the status of women in wage labor, their particular issues in wage labor were left to be resolved or like taken care of by the unions and by the workers' councils. But in the 50s especially, the women's associations really focused on the work that women did actually outside of wage labor, and this was the biggest part of the day was taken by household work, both by women who were in wage labor, but women who also weren't. So this means like housewives. So this is this kind of it's not wage labor per se, but it is work. And they were really focused on how to resolve this burden of household work in order to really minimize it and enable women to have more time to be socially and politically active. So in a sense, wage labor was like on the task list of trade unions or workers' council, but this household work and what women were doing outside of wage labor was the task of the Women's Association under Socialist Alliance of the Working People. So in the 1950s and 60s in particular, and later on, their agenda also changes.
Okay. Thank you for your explanation. Maybe any last questions before we conclude the panel? Okay. So then again, thank you everybody for participating. Thank you to the audience, and I think that we can go downstairs and maybe continue the debate.
Maybe I would just like to announce the lecture on Monday from Ivana Mihaila Žimbrek that she just had the last comment. And the title of her presentation is Women's Organizations, Home Economics and the Beginnings of Modern Retail in Socialist Yugoslavia, from 1950s to 1960s, and maybe more about another socio-political organization presentation. We have Tina Filipovic on the veteran organization on June 16th. So
thank you.
I would like to invite you all, and maybe also those who are watching via Zoom and you're around Ljubljana, to come around, because we will proceed to the more relaxed part of our today's day, and we will have a small opening. And our colleague and librarian is also a musician, so we will have a live music with the guitar, and we will eat something, drink something, have a nice time. So stay around and have a nice time. Thank you all. Thank you for the people who were listening, and come around.
Okay.